The morning my wife told me she was leaving for a girls' trip, she said it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. 3 days, she said, standing in front of the bedroom mirror while fixing her hair. That's all. I need some time with the girls. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, still half asleep, watching her pack clothes into a small suitcase. 3 days. I nodded. Go. Have fun. She smiled at me through the mirror, but it wasn't the smile that bothered me. It was how quickly she looked away. For the past 15 years, I had learned every little expression on my wife's face. I knew when she was angry, when she was nervous, and when she was hiding something. That morning, she was hiding something. I just didn't know what. I didn't ask. Maybe that was my first mistake. Downstairs, our son was eating breakfast while staring at his phone. He was 16, old enough to understand more than he usually admitted, but still young enough that I expected him to tell me when something was wrong. Your mom's leaving this morning, I told him. He didn't look up. I know. I paused. You know? That finally made him raise his eyes. Yeah, she told me yesterday. There was something strange about the way he said it. Not excitement, not sadness, just discomfort. I looked toward the kitchen. His mother was standing near the counter, checking her phone. The moment she noticed me looking at her, she locked the screen. I pretended not to notice. My wife walked over and kissed our son on the forehead. Be good for your dad. He nodded. Then she kissed me. Normally, that would have been nothing. But that morning, the kiss felt different. Too quick, too careful, like she was trying to make sure she had done what a wife was supposed to do before walking out the door. I watched her pull her suitcase toward the front entrance. Call me when you get there, I said. Of course. And text if you need anything. She smiled. I will. Then she opened the door. Before stepping outside, she turned around. For 1 second, her eyes met mine. I swear there was something in them. Fear or guilt. Maybe both. Then she was gone. I stood at the doorway and watched her car disappear down the street. I thought I was watching my wife leave for a relaxing weekend with her friends. I had no idea I was watching the beginning of something that would change our family forever. At the time, I thought the hardest part of the weekend would be figuring out what to cook for my son. I was wrong. The first few hours were completely normal. My son went upstairs to play games, and I started cleaning the kitchen. Around noon, I ordered pizza because neither of us felt like cooking. He came downstairs, grabbed a slice, and disappeared again. Typical teenager. I actually laughed to myself. For once, I thought, maybe having the house to ourselves wouldn't be so bad. No arguments, no schedules, no reminders about homework, just me and my son. But by late afternoon, I started noticing something. He kept checking his phone. Not casually. Every few minutes, he would look at the screen, read something, then immediately put the phone face down whenever I walked into the room. The third time I caught him doing it, I finally asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah, too fast." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "You sure?" He nodded. "Dad, I'm fine." I didn't push him, but something about his voice stayed with me. That evening, we watched a movie together. Or at least, I watched it. My son barely paid attention. Halfway through, his phone vibrated. He looked at it, and his entire expression changed. I paused the movie. "Who is that?" "No one." "No one doesn't usually make you look like that." He stared at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean you look worried." "I'm not worried." Then he stood up. "I'm going upstairs." "During the movie?" "Yeah." He grabbed his phone and walked toward the stairs. I watched him go. "Son?" He stopped. I almost asked him what was going on. Almost. But then he turned around and forced a small smile. "Good night, Dad." "It's barely 9. I'm tired." Then he walked upstairs. I sat there alone in the living room, staring at the paused television. Something was wrong. I could feel it. And for the first time, I started wondering whether my son was worried about his mother or whether he was worried about something his mother had done. I didn't sleep well that night. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up and went downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the living room, I noticed a faint light coming from the couch. My son was sitting there. He was still awake, holding his phone with both hands. I was about to call his name when I heard him whisper something. I couldn't make out the words, so I stepped closer. He suddenly looked up. Our eyes met. He froze. Then, almost immediately, he locked his phone and stood up. "Dad?" Why are you awake? He swallowed. I couldn't sleep. I looked at the phone in his hand. What were you looking at? Nothing. There it was again. That word. Nothing. But this time, I knew it wasn't true. My son walked past me and headed toward the stairs. Son. He stopped. Is this about your mother? His shoulders went completely still. He didn't turn around, and that silence told me more than any answer could. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Because suddenly, I wasn't thinking about my wife's girls' trip anymore. I was thinking about what my 16-year-old son knew, and why he was so afraid to tell me. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, and for a few seconds, I forgot everything that had happened during the night. Then I remembered my son standing at the bottom of the stairs, freezing the moment I asked if his mother was involved. I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't said no. He had simply gone silent. And after 16 years of being his father, I knew that kind of silence. It meant he was carrying something too heavy for him to handle alone. When I finally went downstairs, I found him already sitting at the kitchen table. His phone was beside his plate, screen facing down. The moment I entered the room, his hand moved toward it instinctively. I noticed. He noticed that I noticed. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. Then I forced myself to act normal. Morning. Morning. His voice was quiet. I opened the refrigerator and started making breakfast, but my mind was nowhere near the kitchen. I kept wondering what had happened the night before, what he had been looking at on that phone, and why he seemed so frightened of telling me anything about his mother. I decided not to interrogate him. If I pushed too hard, he might shut down completely. Instead, I made pancakes, put a plate in front of him, and sat across the table. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. School, a video game he wanted, the weather, anything except his mother. Then his phone buzzed. His eyes immediately dropped toward it. He didn't touch it, but I watched his face change. He looked nervous again. I took a sip of coffee and casually asked, "Your mom checking in?" He hesitated. "Maybe. She hasn't texted me yet. She probably will." There was something about that answer that made me look at him more carefully. "Did she text you last night?" He stopped eating. It was only a second, but it was enough. "No," he said. I knew he was lying. I didn't call him out. Instead, I nodded and looked down at my coffee. "Okay." He finished breakfast quickly and stood up. "I'm going upstairs." "You're not going to school?" "It's Saturday." "Right." He started walking away, then stopped halfway across the kitchen. I thought he might finally say something. Instead, he simply turned around and went upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard his bedroom door close. I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. My son had never been good at lying to me. He wasn't a rebellious kid. He wasn't the kind of teenager who constantly got into trouble or kept secrets just for the sake of keeping them. If he was hiding something now, there had to be a reason. And somehow, I was becoming more convinced that reason had something to do with my wife. I picked up my phone and checked for a message from her. Nothing. She had promised to let me know when she arrived. She had been gone for almost 24 hours, and I still hadn't heard from her. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she was busy with her friends. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe they were sleeping late. There were a dozen innocent explanations. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me before leaving. That brief moment of fear in her eyes came back to me. I called her. The phone rang several times before she answered. "Hey," she said. Her voice sounded different. "Hey, just checking on you. Did you guys get there okay?" There was a pause. "Yeah, everything's fine." "Good." I was starting to wonder. "You never texted." "I got busy." "Having fun?" "Of course." I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "How are the girls?" Another pause. "They're good." Something about that answer bothered me. Not the words, the hesitation before them. "Where are you guys staying?" She suddenly became defensive. "Why?" I frowned. "Why?" "I'm just asking." "I told you, we're having a girls' weekend. I don't know why you're suddenly asking me all these questions." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not questioning you. I just wanted to know where you were." "Well, you know now." Her tone had changed completely. I stayed quiet. Then she said, "I have to go." "Already?" "Yeah, we're about to head out." "Okay, call me later." "Sure." The call ended. I stared at my phone. Something wasn't right. My wife had never talked to me like that over a simple question. And if she really was with a group of friends, why had she sounded so nervous when I asked where they were staying? I was still thinking about it when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. My son entered the kitchen. He looked at me, then at my phone. Was that Mom? Yeah. He stopped. Is she okay? The question caught me off guard. Why wouldn't she be? He immediately looked away. I don't know. I stood up. Son. He kept walking. Wait. He stopped. I could see his shoulders tense. Did your mom tell you something before she left? He didn't answer. Did she? Finally, he turned around. No. The answer came too quickly. I walked closer. Then why did you ask if she was okay? He stared at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked down at the floor and whispered, Dad, just leave it alone. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Leave what alone? Nothing. There's that word again. His face tightened. I softened my voice. I'm not angry with you. I'm your dad. If something is happening, you can tell me. He looked at me then, and I saw something I had never seen in my son's eyes before. Fear. Not teenage embarrassment. Not guilt over something stupid. Real fear. He opened his mouth like he was finally going to tell me. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Whatever he saw made the color drain from his face. Who is that? I asked. He didn't answer. Son, who just texted you? He locked the phone. It's nobody. Let me see it. His eyes snapped toward mine. No. I was stunned. He had never spoken to me like that. What did you say? I said no. Then he turned and rushed upstairs. I followed him halfway up the stairs but stopped myself. I didn't want to turn this into a fight. I stood there listening to his bedroom door slam shut. A minute later, I heard the lock click. I went back downstairs. I didn't know what my son was hiding. I didn't know what my wife was hiding. But now I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening between them had started long before my wife packed that suitcase. And I was beginning to wonder if her girls' trip had never really been the reason she left at all. For the rest of that afternoon, I tried to convince myself that I was making too much of everything. Maybe my son was simply protecting his mother because he knew she wouldn't want me asking questions. Maybe the message had been from one of his friends. Maybe the nervous look on his face had nothing to do with my wife at all. I kept giving myself innocent explanations because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to consider. If my wife was hiding something from me, I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. After 15 years of marriage, you don't immediately assume the person you built a life with is keeping a serious secret. You find reasons to trust them. You find reasons not to look too closely. But my son made that difficult. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard him come downstairs. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood there staring inside without taking anything out. I was sitting at the table with my laptop open, pretending to work. I watched him from the corner of my eye. He seemed distracted. His hair was messy, his shirt was wrinkled, and he looked like he hadn't slept much. Finally, he grabbed a bottle of water and closed the refrigerator. You hungry? I asked. Not really. I can make something. I'm good. He started walking away. You've barely eaten today. He stopped, but didn't turn around. I'm just not hungry, Dad. I closed my laptop. You've been acting strange since your mom left. His shoulders stiffened. I'm not acting strange. Okay, I'm not. I looked at him. I didn't say you were in trouble. He finally turned around. Then why do you keep asking me questions? Because you're my son. That doesn't mean I have to tell you everything. The words came out sharper than I expected. I sat back. He immediately seemed to regret saying them. Sorry, he muttered. I'm just tired. I know. He nodded and started toward the stairs again. Then his phone vibrated. He stopped. I watched his hand move toward his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and immediately turned his body away from me. That small movement told me everything I needed to know. Is that your mom? No. The answer was immediate. Then who is it? He slipped the phone back into his pocket. I said it's nobody. I stared at him. He stared back. Then he walked upstairs. I didn't follow him this time. I stayed at the kitchen table, staring at the stairs, and something inside me finally changed. Until that moment, I had been trying to protect my son from whatever was happening. Now I realized I might need to protect him from something he already knew. That evening, I received a message from my wife. Having a great time. Don't wait up tonight. I read it twice. There was nothing unusual about the words, but the timing bothered me. It was almost 8 o'clock. She hadn't called since the morning, and now she was suddenly telling me not to wait up. I typed a simple response. Glad you're having fun. Tell everyone I said hi. I stared at the message before sending it. Then I added, love you. I almost deleted it. Instead, I sent it. She replied less than a minute later. Love you too. I put my phone down. For some reason, those 3 words made me feel worse. I went upstairs to check on my son. His bedroom door was closed. I knocked. Yeah? It's me. What? Can I come in? There was a pause. Sure. I opened the door. He was sitting at his desk with his laptop open, but he wasn't looking at it. His phone was in his hand. The moment I entered, he put it down. I smiled slightly. Relax, I'm not here to interrogate you. I know. I sat on the edge of his bed. For a few seconds, I didn't say anything. Then I asked, are you worried about Mom? His eyes moved toward the window. No. You sure? Yeah. Because if something happened before she left, nothing happened. His response was too quick again. I nodded slowly. Okay. He looked at me. You don't believe me. I believe you're trying to tell me something without actually telling me. His face changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. He looked down at his hands. Dad. Yeah? Can you promise me something? My chest tightened. Depends what it is. Don't call Mom again tonight. I stared at him. Why? Just don't. Why? He shook his head. Please. I stood up. Son, what happened? Nothing. Stop saying that. He looked up at me. For a second I thought he might finally tell me everything. Instead he whispered, she told me not to say anything. I froze. The room suddenly felt completely silent. Who told you? He realized his mistake immediately. His eyes widened. I took one step toward him. Your mother? He didn't answer. Did your mother tell you not to tell me something? Dad, forget it. No, I'm not forgetting it. Please. What did she tell you? He stood up. I can't. You can't or you won't? I just can't. His voice cracked. That stopped me. My son turned away, and I saw him wipe his face with his sleeve. He was crying. That was the moment I knew this wasn't some harmless secret. I lowered my voice. Come here. He shook his head. Hey, look at me. He finally turned. I had seen my son cry when he was little, when he fell off his bike, when he broke his arm playing football, when his grandfather died. But this was different. He wasn't crying because he was hurt. He was crying because he was scared. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. You don't have to protect your mother from me. His eyes filled with tears again. I'm not protecting her. Then what are you doing? He looked toward the door. I followed his gaze. Then he whispered, I'm protecting you. I felt the air leave my lungs. What does that mean? He shook his head. I shouldn't have said that. Son, what does that mean? I don't know. You just said you're protecting me. I didn't mean it. Yes, you did. He stepped away from me. I reached for his arm, but he pulled back. Please, Dad. Please, what? Stop asking. I stared at him. Does this have something to do with where Mom is? His face went pale. That was my answer. I walked toward the door. Dad? I turned. He was standing beside his desk, holding his phone tightly in one hand. What? He swallowed. Whatever you find out. He paused. Don't blame me. I stared at him. What am I supposed to find out? He didn't answer. I stepped into the hallway. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door close. I stood there for several seconds, completely still. Then I went downstairs and called my wife again. This time, she didn't answer. I waited. A few minutes later, I called again. Still nothing. I sent a message. Call me when you can. It's important. No response. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, my phone vibrated. I grabbed it. It was a message from my wife. Everything is fine. Stop worrying. I'll explain when I get home. I read it over and over. Then another message appeared. This one was from my son. Dad, please don't call her again. I stared at both messages. My wife telling me everything was fine. My son begging me not to call her. 2 people in my family were asking me to stop asking questions. And suddenly, I knew I couldn't. I went back upstairs. My son's door was locked. Son? No answer. I knocked again. Open the door. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. I stood there for a moment, then heard something inside. A drawer opening, then closing. I stepped back. Are you okay? Still nothing. I was about to walk away when I heard him say something through the door. His voice was so quiet I almost missed it. Dad. Yeah? I'm sorry. I felt a chill run through me. Open the door. Silence. Son, open the door. Nothing. I tried the handle again. Still locked. And for the first time that weekend, I realized I wasn't waiting for my wife to come home anymore. I was waiting to find out what my son was so terrified of. And whatever it was, I had a feeling my wife had already known the truth long before she ever packed that suitcase. I barely slept that night. I stayed awake in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the same words kept repeating in my mind. Dad, I'm protecting you. No matter how many times I tried to convince myself that my son had simply said something out of fear, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something serious, something about my wife, something he believed could hurt me. Around 3 in the morning, I finally got out of bed and went downstairs. The house was completely quiet. My wife was hundreds of miles away on her girls' trip, and my son was asleep behind a locked bedroom door. At least, I hoped he was asleep. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My phone was sitting on the counter. I picked it up and checked for messages. Nothing from my wife, nothing from my son. I opened my wife's last message again. Everything is fine. Stop worrying. I'll explain when I get home. I stared at those words for a long time. If everything was fine, why would she need to explain anything when she returned? That sentence alone told me she knew something was wrong. I started scrolling through our old conversations, not because I was looking for proof of anything, but because I wanted to understand when things had changed between us. At first, I found nothing unusual. Grocery lists, family plans, bills, pictures of our son, random messages about dinner, 15 years of ordinary life stored inside a phone. Then I noticed something. There was a gap. A conversation thread with my wife that normally appeared near the top of my messages had disappeared. I knew I wasn't imagining it because I remembered texting her 2 weeks earlier about our son's school meeting. I searched her name. The conversation appeared, but when I opened it, several messages were missing. I could see my own texts, but some of her replies were gone. I frowned and stared at the screen. Maybe she had deleted them. Maybe I had accidentally deleted something. I didn't know, but the discovery made my stomach tighten. I went back through the messages. There were several places where her replies were missing, and every missing section seemed to be around the same period. The weeks when she had started becoming distant. The weeks when she began staying late at work. The weeks when I started noticing that she was spending more time on her phone. I put the phone down. I told myself to stop. This was becoming obsessive. I was searching for something because I expected to find something. That wasn't fair to my wife. So I went upstairs. But when I reached the hallway, I saw a thin line of light beneath my son's bedroom door. I stopped. It was almost 4 in the morning. I knocked softly. Son? No answer. I knocked again. Are you awake? This time I heard movement. A few seconds later, the door opened slightly. My son looked at me. His face was pale. What are you doing awake? He asked. I could ask you the same thing. He looked behind him. What? Why are you awake? I couldn't sleep. I looked at the room. His laptop was open. His phone was on the desk. And there was a small backpack lying on the floor beside his bed. I frowned. Why is that packed? He looked down. It's not packed. It's literally a backpack full of clothes. I was going to clean my room. At 4 in the morning? He didn't answer. I looked at him carefully. Are you planning to go somewhere? No. Then why is your bag packed? He grabbed it and moved it toward the closet. Can we not do this right now? Do what? Ask me questions. I felt frustration building inside me. I'm asking because you're acting like something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Your mother says everything is fine. You tell me to stop calling her. You lock your door, you're awake at 4 in the morning with a packed bag, and you expect me to believe nothing is wrong? His eyes filled with tears. Dad, please. I lowered my voice. I'm not angry. You should be. That sentence stopped me. What? He looked away. You should be angry. With who? He didn't answer. With your mom? His jaw tightened. I stepped closer. Tell me what she did. He shook his head. I can't. Why? Because she told me not to. Why would your mother tell our son to keep something from his own father? He looked at me. And then he said something I will never forget. Because she knew you would leave. My heart dropped. Leave where? He didn't respond. Leave her? Still nothing. Leave this house? He looked down. Dad, I could barely get the words out. Did your mother think I would leave our family if I knew the truth? His silence was enough. I stepped back. For 15 years, I had believed my marriage was strong. We had gone through financial problems, arguments, family losses, raising a child, career changes, and all the ordinary struggles that come with growing older together. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were honest with each other. Now I was standing outside my son's bedroom at 4 in the morning, realizing that my wife had apparently been preparing our child for a future without me. I felt sick. Is she leaving me? My son's eyes immediately filled with tears. I don't know. You do know something. I know she's scared. Scared of what? He shook his head. I reached for the door. Dad. I stopped. What? Please don't look through my things. I turned around. Why would I? He didn't answer. I stared at him. Then I noticed his desk. His laptop was open, but the screen was dark. The phone was sitting beside it, and underneath the phone was a small white envelope. I had seen that envelope before. It was the kind my wife used when she wanted to keep important documents somewhere private. I pointed at it. What's that? My son immediately moved his hand over it. Nothing. I almost laughed. Not that word again. Dad, just go to bed. What's in the envelope? Nothing. Let me see it. No. He grabbed it. I stepped toward him. Give it to me. Dad, stop. What is it? I said stop. His voice echoed through the hallway. Then he froze. I froze too. For a moment, neither of us moved. Finally, he looked at the envelope in his hand. Then he looked at me. I'm sorry. He put the envelope inside his backpack. I stared at him. Why are you hiding something from me? He shook his head. I'm not hiding it from you. Then who are you hiding it from? He looked toward the hallway. That was when I heard something. A faint sound. A notification. Coming from downstairs. My phone. I had left it on the kitchen counter. I walked downstairs quickly. My son followed me. When I reached the kitchen, my phone screen was glowing. A message had just arrived. It was from an unknown number. I opened it. There was no greeting, no explanation. Just one sentence. You need to know what your wife is really doing on this trip. I stared at the screen. My son came to a stop behind me. I turned around. He looked at the message. And the second he saw it, all the color disappeared from his face. You know this number? He didn't answer. Son? He shook his head. Dad, delete it. I stared at him. Why? Just delete it. Who sent it? I don't know. You clearly know something. No, I don't. I showed him the phone. Then why are you scared? He looked at the message again. His eyes filled with tears. Because I've seen it before. My heart started pounding. Where? He looked toward the stairs. Then toward the front door. And finally back at me. On Mom's phone. I couldn't speak. The entire house seemed to go silent. I looked down at the message again. You need to know what your wife is really doing on this trip. Suddenly, the girls' trip didn't feel like a weekend away anymore. It felt like a cover story. I called my wife. This time, the phone rang only once. Then someone answered. But it wasn't my wife. I heard a man's voice. Hello? My blood ran cold. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. My wife's name was displayed. I put it back to my ear. Who is this? There was silence. Then the man said, Who are you? I couldn't breathe. This is my wife's phone. Another pause. Then the call ended. I stood in the kitchen completely frozen. My son was staring at me. Neither of us spoke. I called again. This time, the phone was switched off. I looked at my son. Who was that? He started crying. I don't know. Tell me the truth. I don't know, Dad. Have you heard that man before? He shook his head. I stared at him. Then he suddenly said something that made everything worse. Dad, Mom told me if you ever found out, I had to make sure you didn't go looking for her. I felt a cold wave move through my body. Why? He didn't answer. Why would she say that? He looked at me through his tears. Because she knew you would. And in that moment, I realized the person who had been keeping me away from the truth wasn't just my wife. My son had been doing it too. And now someone I had never heard of had my wife's phone. I didn't move for several seconds after my son finished speaking. The kitchen suddenly felt unfamiliar, even though I had stood in that exact spot thousands of times. My wife was away on a trip she had described as harmless, a simple weekend with her friends. My son had been acting strangely since she left, and now a man had answered her phone. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe someone had picked up the wrong phone. Maybe my wife had handed it to a friend. Maybe the man was someone from the hotel. There were possibilities, but none of them explained why my son looked terrified when he heard the man's voice. I looked at him and asked, "How long have you known?" He wiped his face with his sleeve and asked, "Known what?" I shook my head. "Don't do that. You told me Mom warned you that if I found out, you had to stop me from looking for her. You said you've seen that number before. You knew exactly what that message meant. So I'm asking you one simple question. How long have you known something was wrong?" He stood there silently for several seconds before finally admitting, "A few weeks." The words hit me harder than I expected. "A few weeks?" He nodded. "What happened a few weeks ago?" I asked. "I don't know." "Then how do you know something is wrong?" He looked down and said, "I just know." I was getting frustrated, but I knew that if I raised my voice, he would shut down completely. He was 16. Whatever he had been carrying it alone because an adult had apparently convinced him that keeping a secret was the only way to protect his family. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Look at me," I said. He slowly lifted his head. "You are not responsible for protecting me from your mother." His eyes immediately filled with tears. "I know." I shook my head. "No, you don't. You think you have to choose sides. You don't. Whatever happened between your mother and me is between the two of us. You're my son. You don't have to lie for either one of us." He stared at me for a long time before whispering, "She told me you'd hate her." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Why?" He looked away. "She said you would think she betrayed you." I stared at him. "Did she?" He immediately shook his head. "I don't know." I leaned forward. "Have you seen her with this man?" His eyes snapped toward mine. That was enough to tell me there was more. "You have," I said. He quickly shook his head. "No, I haven't seen them together." "Then what have you seen?" He looked down at the table. "I saw messages." My heart started pounding. "Between Mom and this man?" He nodded. "How long ago?" I asked. "Before the trip." "What kind of messages?" He hesitated. "I didn't read all of them." "But you read some." He swallowed. "Yeah." "What did they say?" He shook his head. "I don't want to repeat it." "You have to." "No." "Why?" "Because I promised Mom." I stared at him, realizing just how deeply my wife had involved our son in whatever was happening. "Your mother made you promise to keep secrets from me?" I asked. He looked ashamed. I thought I was helping. I softened my voice. "I know." That seemed to break something inside him. Tears rolled down his face as he whispered, "I didn't want you to leave." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Leave you?" He nodded. "Mom said if you found out everything, you would leave." I squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me and said, "But you might leave her." I didn't answer immediately because, for the first time, I realized I honestly didn't know what I would do if I discovered my wife had betrayed me. My son noticed my silence, and that seemed to confirm his fear. "That's what she was afraid of," he whispered. I asked him what exactly his mother was afraid I would find, and after several seconds of silence, he finally said, "The money." I frowned. "What money?" He looked at me as if he expected me to understand. "The account." I shook my head. "What account?" He hesitated before saying, "There's another account." I immediately thought about our separate bank accounts, but he quickly explained that this was different. "Mom has one," he said. "Your mother has a bank account?" I asked. "Yeah." I almost laughed because of how ordinary that sounded. "Of course she does. We both have separate accounts. That's normal." But he shook his head. "No, Dad, it's not that." Something about his expression made me stop. "What do you mean?" He looked down. "She told me not to tell you." I stared at him. "About what?" he whispered. "The amount." I asked how much money he was talking about, and when he finally gave me the number, I thought I had misunderstood him. It was far more than I expected. "That's impossible," I said. "I knew you wouldn't believe me," he replied. I asked where he had heard the number, and he told me his mother had been talking on the phone the week before. He had been coming downstairs when he overheard her. She hadn't known he was there. I asked what else she had said, and my son told me she had said she couldn't keep doing this, and that I was starting to notice. I felt my stomach tighten. "Notice what?" I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened our shared banking app on my phone. I had never checked every transaction because I trusted my wife to handle some of our finances. We had always divided responsibilities. I paid certain bills, she handled others, and we had joint savings, investments, and retirement accounts. But when I opened the account history and started scrolling, I noticed several transfers I didn't recognize. At first they were small, but then I saw larger amounts. I kept scrolling further back. There were dozens of transfers, some from months ago, and others going back almost 2 years. My hands started to feel cold. Then I found one that had been made only 3 days before my wife left for her trip. It was a large amount, and the destination account wasn't one of ours. I clicked on it and stared at the unfamiliar account information. My son was standing behind me when I asked, "Have you seen this account before?" He looked at the screen, and the expression on his face changed immediately. "You know it?" I asked. He shook his head, but I could tell something was wrong. I showed him the name attached to the account. He stared at it for several seconds before whispering, "Dad." I asked him what was wrong, and he finally said, "That's his." I felt my heart start pounding. "Whose?" He pointed at the screen. "The man." I stared at the name again. "You know his name?" My son nodded. I asked where he had heard it, and he hesitated before telling me that he had heard his mother mention it. I recognized the last name immediately. I had heard it before, though not from my wife. Someone had once warned me to be careful about trusting people around my family, but at the time I had dismissed the warning as unnecessary. Now that name was connected to a secret bank account, a mysterious man, and my wife's unexplained trip. I asked my son if he had actually seen this man. He looked at me for a long moment before finally saying, "Yes." I asked when, and he told me it had happened before my wife left. I asked where, and his answer made my stomach drop. "At our house." I stared at him, unable to process it. "He came here?" My son nodded. "When?" I asked. He told me it had been the previous week. "Why?" I asked. He shook his head and said he didn't know. I asked if his mother had let him in, and my son nodded. Then he told me something I couldn't forget. My wife had told the man that I was at work, but I remembered that day. I had actually come home early. My wife had been in the kitchen when I arrived, and she had seemed nervous. She told me she was surprised to see me, and at the time, I had thought nothing of it. Now, every detail came rushing back. I asked my son what happened after the man left, and he told me the man had given my wife an envelope. My heart immediately started pounding because I remembered the envelope I had seen in my son's room. I asked him if that was the same envelope, and he nodded. I asked why he had it, and he explained that his mother had told him to hide it. "From me?" I asked. He nodded again. I asked what was inside, but he said he didn't know. I demanded to know why he was keeping something that belonged to his mother, and he said she had told him that if I ever found out the truth, he had to keep it somewhere I couldn't find it. I looked toward the stairs and asked where the envelope was. He refused to answer. I took a step toward him and told him to give it to me, but before he could respond, his phone vibrated. He looked down at the screen, and whatever he saw made him freeze. I held out my hand and asked him to give me the phone. He immediately shook his head. I asked who had texted him, but he wouldn't answer. I could see panic spreading across his face. Then he suddenly grabbed his backpack and rushed toward the stairs. I called his name and followed him. He reached the hallway and stopped just before his bedroom door. Slowly, he turned around and looked at me. His eyes were filled with fear. He looked down at the phone in his hand, then back at me, and finally whispered, "Dad, someone knows I told you." That was the moment I understood that my son wasn't simply keeping a secret from me. He was afraid of someone. And if someone knew he had finally started talking to me, then whatever my wife had been hiding was no longer just a problem inside our marriage. Someone else was watching. Someone else knew what my son had seen. And suddenly, the question wasn't only what my wife had been doing on that trip. The question was what this man wanted, why my wife had been sending money to him, and why she had been so terrified that I would discover the truth. For several seconds, I could only stare at my son. "Someone knows I told you." Those words kept repeating in my head, and suddenly the fear in his face made sense. He wasn't simply afraid of disappointing his mother anymore. He was afraid that somebody else might find out what he had told me. I walked toward him slowly and asked, "Who knows?" He shook his head. "I don't know." Then why would you say someone knows? He looked down at his phone. Because I got a message. From who? I don't know. What did it say? He hesitated. I held out my hand. Give me the phone. He immediately pulled it closer to his chest. Dad, please. I'm not trying to punish you. I need to know what's happening. He looked terrified. Finally, he unlocked the screen and showed me the message. It was short. There was no name attached to the number, only a sentence that made my stomach turn. You should have kept your mouth shut. I looked at my son, and he immediately said, I didn't tell him anything. I believed him. At least, I believed he hadn't told anyone else. When did you get this? I asked. A few minutes ago. And you didn't tell me? He shook his head. I was going to. Then why did you run? He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Because I knew this was going to happen. I didn't understand what he meant. What was going to happen? He looked toward the front door. Mom told me that if you ever started asking questions, I should stay away from the windows and not answer the door. I felt a chill run through me. Why would she tell you that? He shook his head. I don't know. But I knew there was no point asking him the same question anymore. My son was scared because he had been given instructions. Someone had prepared him for the possibility that I might discover something. That meant my wife hadn't simply been keeping a secret. She had been preparing for the moment the secret came out. I told my son to stay upstairs while I checked the house. I locked the front door, checked the back door, and looked through every window. There was no one outside, no unfamiliar car, no strange movement, nothing. But the absence of anything suspicious somehow made me more nervous. I went back to the kitchen and looked at the bank transaction again. The account belonged to the man my son had mentioned. I searched his name online, and what I found made my hands stop moving. He wasn't some random stranger. He had worked in financial consulting years earlier and had connections to several businesses in our area. More importantly, I recognized the name of one of those businesses. It was a company my wife had mentioned several times during the past year. She had always described it as one of the companies her firm occasionally worked with. I had never paid attention because I trusted her. Now I wondered how much of what she had told me had actually been true. I searched deeper and found an old photograph of the man. I stared at his face. It was him. My son had been telling the truth. He was the man who had answered my wife's phone. He was the man who had been inside our house. And he was the person receiving money from an account my wife had never mentioned to me. I called my wife again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message. Call me. We need to talk. I almost said more, but I stopped. I didn't want her to know what I had discovered yet. If she really was hiding something, I needed to understand it before confronting her. I went upstairs and found my son sitting on his bed. He looked at me as soon as I entered. Did you find him? He asked. I nodded. I know who he is. My son looked down. What's his name? I told him. His face tightened. That's him. How many times did you see him? Twice. Only twice? He hesitated. That I know of. I stared at him. What does that mean? He said nothing. I sat beside him and waited. Finally, he told me that the first time he had seen the man was about 3 weeks earlier. He had been coming home from school and noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. He thought it belonged to one of my wife's friends, but when he entered the house, he heard voices coming from the study. He recognized his mother's voice, but he didn't recognize the man's. He had started walking toward the room when he heard his mother say my name. That made him stop. He listened. He couldn't hear everything, but he heard enough to know they were talking about me. Then he heard the man say something about money. My son had quietly gone upstairs because he was afraid they would hear him. Later, when the man left, my wife found him in his room. She knew he had been home. She asked if he had heard anything. He told her no. She made him promise never to mention the man to me. I asked my son why he had agreed. His answer broke my heart. Because, she cried. I looked at him. He continued. I had never seen Mom cry like that. She told me she was trying to fix something before it became worse. She said if you found out too soon, everything would fall apart. I asked him what she meant by everything. He shook his head. I don't know. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out the white envelope. I stared at it. You still have it? He nodded. I was going to give it to you. I held out my hand. He didn't immediately let go. Dad, I'm scared. I put my hand over his. So am I. He looked surprised. I told him I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine anymore. If there was something inside that envelope that could explain what was happening, I needed to know. Finally, he released it. The envelope was sealed, but not tightly. I opened it carefully. Inside were several printed documents and a photograph. The first document was a bank statement. The account number matched the one I had seen earlier. The account was in my wife's name, but the activity showed transfers to the man's company. There were dozens of payments. Some were small, others were enormous. I kept flipping through the pages. The dates went back almost 2 years. Then I saw something that made me stop. One of the payments had been made shortly after a large amount of money had disappeared from one of our joint investment accounts. I had always assumed that money had been moved into another investment. My wife had told me she was handling it. Apparently, she hadn't. I looked at my son. "Did your mom know I didn't know about this?" He nodded. "She thought you would find out eventually." I looked at the next document. It was a contract. My wife's signature was at the bottom. I read the first few lines and felt my stomach turn. It wasn't a normal business agreement. It was a financial guarantee. My wife had apparently agreed to cover a debt belonging to someone else. The man's name was listed on the document. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. Then I found the photograph. It showed my wife standing beside the man. They were outside a building I recognized. It was the same building where she had told me she sometimes met clients. I stared at the picture for a long time. There was nothing romantic about the image. They weren't touching, they weren't smiling at each other. But there was something about my wife's expression that disturbed me. She looked frightened. The man looked calm, almost confident. It didn't look like two people having an affair. It looked like someone who had power over someone else. I looked at my son. "When was this taken?" He shook his head. "I don't know." "Where did you get it?" "It was inside the envelope." I looked at the back of the photograph. There was a date written in black ink. I recognized the date immediately. It was the same day my wife had told me she was working late. The same night she had come home after midnight and claimed she had been dealing with an emergency at the office. I remembered asking her if everything was okay. She had kissed me and told me not to worry. I felt anger rising inside me, but underneath the anger was something worse. Fear. Because the more I uncovered, the less this looked like a secret affair or some simple betrayal. My wife had moved money. She had signed documents. She had met this man in secret. She had involved our son. And now someone was sending threatening messages to our house. I asked my son if there was anything else he knew. He looked at me. Then he said, "There's one thing." "What?" "Mom didn't leave because of the girls' trip." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He looked down at the photograph. "She left because she knew you were about to find out." My heart stopped. "Find out what?" He didn't answer. I grabbed my phone and checked the location my wife had shared with me before leaving. It showed the hotel she had told me about. But then, I noticed something strange. The location had stopped updating. I checked the timestamp. It had stopped several hours after she left. I called the hotel. A woman answered. I gave her my wife's name and asked if she was staying there. The woman put me on hold. When she came back, her voice had changed. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone registered under that name." I stared at the wall. I asked her to check again. She did. The answer was the same. My wife wasn't staying at the hotel. I ended the call and slowly turned toward my son. He was already crying. "You knew," I whispered. He shook his head. "I didn't know where she was." "But you knew she wasn't at that hotel." He nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Mom made me promise." I looked at my wife's last message on my phone. "Everything is fine. Stop worrying. I'll explain when I get home." Suddenly, I understood why she had chosen those words. She wasn't asking me to trust her. She was buying time. And whatever she was doing on that trip, she had never intended for me to find out until it was too late. The moment I realized my wife wasn't at the hotel she had told me about, something inside me changed. Until then, I had still been trying to find a reasonable explanation for everything. I had told myself there had to be another side to the story. That the strange messages, the hidden account, the man who had answered her phone, and the documents in that envelope might all have an explanation I simply didn't understand yet. But now there was one fact I couldn't explain away. My wife had deliberately lied about where she was staying. She had told me she was with her friends, but the hotel had no record of her. I looked at my son and asked him if he knew where she really was. He shook his head immediately. "I don't know, Dad." I asked again. Are you sure? He nodded. Mom didn't tell me. I believed him this time. He looked genuinely frightened, and I was beginning to realize that my son had never been part of whatever my wife was doing. He had simply been caught in the middle of it. I walked downstairs and sat at the kitchen table. I needed to think before I did something stupid. My first instinct was to drive wherever my wife might be and confront her. But I didn't even know where to go. I checked her location again. Still nothing. I called her, straight to voicemail. I sent another message. Where are you? No response. I waited 5 minutes and called again. Nothing. I looked at the photograph from the envelope. My wife and the man were standing outside the same building she had claimed was her office. If she wasn't at the hotel, maybe she was there. I searched the building's address and found the name of the company connected to the man. It was a private financial firm. I searched the company records and discovered that the man had been involved in several lawsuits over the past few years. None had resulted in criminal charges, but there were complaints from former clients who claimed he had pressured them into financial agreements they didn't understand. I stared at the screen. My wife had signed one of those agreements. She had apparently guaranteed a debt for him. But why? And why had she been sending him money from an account I knew nothing about? My son came downstairs while I was searching. He stood near the kitchen doorway and watched me for several seconds. Dad? I looked up. Yeah? He hesitated. Are you going somewhere? I don't know yet. His face changed. Mom told me you might. I stared at him. When did she tell you that? Before she left. I stood up. What exactly did she say? He looked uncomfortable. She said if you started asking questions, you might try to find her. And she told me not to go with you. That sentence immediately caught my attention. Why would she tell you not to go with me? He shook his head. I don't know. I looked at the envelope again. There's something else in there, isn't there? His eyes moved toward the backpack. No. You're lying. I'm not. You are. He grabbed the backpack. Dad, please just leave it alone. Leave what alone? He didn't answer. You told me there was an envelope. You told me there was money. You told me about the man. You told me Mom was lying about the hotel. And now you're telling me there's something else you haven't told me. What is it? He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I don't know how to explain it. I softened my voice. Then try. He opened the backpack and pulled out another piece of paper. It was folded several times. He handed it to me without saying anything. I unfolded it. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was my wife's. I recognized it immediately. There were only a few lines, but they were enough to make my heart pound. She had written that she was sorry, that she had never wanted things to reach this point, and that she needed to make sure our son was safe before she told me everything. I read it again. Then I looked at the date. It had been written 2 days before she left. I asked my son where he found it. He said it had been inside the envelope. I asked why he hadn't shown it to me earlier. He said he was afraid. I asked what he was afraid of, and he looked toward the windows. That someone would come back. I immediately walked to the window. Who? He shook his head. I don't know. I turned around. Then why are you afraid? He didn't answer. I walked toward him and asked, Did someone threaten you? He looked down. Not directly. What does that mean? They didn't say they would hurt me. Who? He swallowed. The man. I felt my anger rise. What did he do? My son took a deep breath. He came to school. I froze. What? A few days before Mom left. Why? I don't know. Did he talk to you? He nodded. What did he say? My son looked terrified. He asked if you had told me anything. About what? About the money. I stared at him. What did you tell him? Nothing. Did he believe you? I don't know. I stepped closer. What else did he say? My son's voice became quieter. He said Mom was trying to fix everything. Fix what? He didn't tell me. And then, my son looked down. He told me that if you found out too soon, you would make everything worse. I felt a wave of anger move through me. He came to your school and talked to you about my marriage and our finances? My son nodded. And you didn't tell me? Mom told me not to. I closed my eyes for a moment. Son, you should have told me. I know. You should have come to me. I know. I could have protected you. He looked at me. That's why I didn't tell you. I frowned. What do you mean? He whispered. Mom said if you found out, you would go after him. I stared at him. And she was afraid of what I would do? He nodded. Why? Because she said you don't know what he's capable of. I looked at the photograph again. The man's face suddenly seemed different. He no longer looked like a stranger connected to some complicated financial problem. He looked like someone who had been manipulating my wife, my family, and possibly my son. I decided I was going to find him. I told my son to stay home and lock the doors. He immediately said, "No." I turned toward him. "What?" He stepped closer. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not, Dad. You don't understand." "I understand enough. You're staying here." He shook his head. "Mom told me not to let you go alone." I stared at him. "Your mother told you not to let me go alone?" He nodded. "She said if you ever found out, I had to make sure you didn't do anything stupid." Despite everything, I almost laughed. "Your mother knows me too well." But my son didn't smile. He was serious. "Dad, please." I looked at him and realized he wasn't asking because he wanted to come along. He was asking because he was afraid of what might happen if I left him alone. I agreed to let him come. We got into my car. I started the engine. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. The address of the financial company was only 20 minutes away. I kept thinking about my wife, wondering how long she had been trapped in whatever situation she was trying to hide from me. I wondered if she had betrayed me willingly or if someone had pressured her. I wondered why she had taken money from our accounts. And most of all, I wondered why she had chosen to involve our son. Halfway there, my phone rang. My wife. I immediately answered. "Where are you?" I demanded. There was silence on the other end. Then she whispered, "You found out." I looked at my son. What did I find out? Another pause. Everything. My grip tightened around the steering wheel. "Then tell me the truth." She started crying. "I didn't want this to happen." "Where are you?" "I can't tell you." "Are you with him?" Silence. I asked again. "Are you with him?" Finally, she whispered, "Yes." My heart dropped. I asked her why she had lied to me about the trip. She said, "Because I needed time." "Time for what?" She started crying harder. "To protect you." I almost laughed because those were the exact words my son had used. "Protect me from what?" She didn't answer. "Where are you?" "I can't tell you." "Then tell me his name." She went completely silent. I looked at my son. He was staring at me. Then my wife whispered, "You already know." The call ended. I sat there gripping the steering wheel. My son suddenly said, "Dad, turn around." I looked at him. "What?" "Turn the car around." "Why?" He looked through the windshield. His face changed. I followed his eyes. A dark SUV had appeared behind us. It was keeping the same distance. Every time I changed lanes, it changed lanes. Every time I slowed down, it slowed down. I looked at my son. "Do you recognize it?" He didn't answer. "Son?" He suddenly reached for his phone. "Dad, turn here." "Why?" "Just do it." I turned onto a side street. The SUV followed. My heart started pounding. "Do you know that car?" My son stared at it through the rear window. Then he whispered, "That's him." I looked at him. "The man?" He nodded. "Are you sure?" "Yes." I pressed the accelerator. The SUV followed. My son grabbed the door handle. "Dad, slow down." "What?" "Slow down." I looked at him. He was staring at something outside the passenger window. I followed his gaze. There was another vehicle parked near the corner, the same dark SUV. I looked back in the mirror. The vehicle behind us was still there. My stomach dropped. There were two of them. I pulled into a parking lot and stopped. The SUV behind us continued past. My son breathed out. I looked at him. "What just happened?" He didn't answer. "Son?" He opened his door. I immediately reached over and grabbed his arm. "Where are you going?" He pulled away. "Let me go." "Why?" "I need to check something." "Check what?" He opened the door. "Son, get back in the car." He didn't listen. He stepped out. I got out after him. "Come back." He kept walking. "Son." He stopped. I ran toward him. He turned around. And then, without saying a word, he suddenly walked away from me. Not toward the car. Not toward the house. He walked toward the opposite side of the parking lot, carrying the backpack that contained the envelope, the documents, and the secret my wife had spent weeks trying to hide. I stood there watching him disappear behind a row of parked cars. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I realized something. He wasn't running away from me. He was walking toward someone. And when I followed him, I finally saw who was waiting on the other side. I followed my son around the row of parked cars, calling his name as quietly as I could. At first, I couldn't see him. Then I spotted him standing near the far end of the parking lot, completely still. His backpack was hanging from one shoulder, and he was staring at someone standing beside a silver sedan. My first thought was that it was the man we had been looking for. My heart started pounding as I moved closer, but then I realized something was wrong. The person standing there wasn't a man. It was a woman. She looked to be in her late 40s, wearing a dark jacket and holding a phone in one hand. When she saw me approaching, her expression changed. My son turned around and looked at me, and for the first time that weekend, I realized he hadn't walked away from me because he was angry. He had walked away because he had recognized her. "Who is she?" I asked. My son didn't answer. The woman looked at him and then at me. "You shouldn't have brought him here," she said. I immediately stepped between her and my son. "Who are you?" She hesitated before answering. "My name is Rachel." I stared at her. "How do you know my son?" She looked at him again. "Because your wife asked me to watch him." "Watch him from what?" Rachel looked around the parking lot before lowering her voice. "From the man you're looking for." I asked her why my wife would need someone to watch our son, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "Did you open the envelope?" I stared at her. "Yes." Her expression changed. "Then you know more than you were supposed to." I felt anger rise inside me. I know my wife has been moving money. I know she has been meeting a man behind my back, and I know she lied about where she was staying. What I don't know is why my son is being dragged into this. Rachel looked at my son. "Because your wife was afraid he would be used against you." I immediately asked what that meant. Rachel took a breath and said, "Your wife didn't leave for a girls' trip. She left because she believed someone was about to expose what she had done." I looked at my son. He was staring at the ground. "What did she do?" I asked. Rachel shook her head. "That's something she needs to tell you herself." I stepped closer. "No, I'm done waiting for my wife to decide when I deserve the truth." Rachel studied my face. "Then you need to understand something before you confront her. Your wife wasn't working with that man because she wanted to betray you." I frowned. "She signed financial agreements with him. She moved our money. She met him secretly. She lied to me. What exactly am I supposed to call that?" Rachel didn't flinch. "Fear." That word stopped me. I looked at her and asked what she meant. She told me that nearly 2 years earlier, my wife had discovered that someone had been using one of the companies she worked with to move money through accounts belonging to clients. She had stumbled across something she wasn't supposed to see. At first, she thought it was an accounting error. Then she realized the transactions were intentional. Money was being moved through shell companies, and some of it eventually disappeared. My wife had confronted the man who controlled the accounts. He warned her to stay quiet. She didn't. I listened without speaking as Rachel explained that my wife had tried to report what she found, but before she could, the man discovered that she had copied documents. He threatened her, not with violence, but with something he knew would hurt her more. He told her that if she went to the authorities, he would make sure my career and reputation were destroyed. He had information about some of our financial dealings and claimed he could make it look like I had been involved in the scheme. My wife didn't believe him at first. Then he showed her documents that had my name on them. Some were legitimate, but others had been altered. She became terrified that he could frame me. I asked Rachel why my wife hadn't simply told me. Her answer was simple: because she thought you would go after him. I almost laughed bitterly. She was right, Rachel nodded. That's why she kept you out of it. I asked how Rachel knew all this. She said she had been helping my wife for months. She had worked in compliance and financial investigations and had helped her understand what the man was doing. She also told me that my wife had been quietly gathering evidence against him. I looked at my son. "How much of this did you know?" He finally looked up. "Not all of it." I asked what he did know. He said his mother had started acting differently months earlier. She became nervous whenever someone called her. She began checking the locks at night. She told him not to open the door for strangers. Then one day, he saw the man outside the school. He confronted my wife about it, and that was when she finally told him that someone was threatening the family. She begged him not to tell me because she believed I would immediately confront the man. My son had promised. But he had broken that promise when he realized I was becoming suspicious. I looked at him and asked why he had never told me about Rachel. He said he didn't know who she was at first. He had only seen her twice. The second time was the day before my wife left. She had met my wife somewhere outside the house, and my wife had told him that Rachel was helping her. My son had memorized her face because his mother told him that, if anything happened, he should find her. I turned toward Rachel. Then why did my wife leave? Rachel looked at me for several seconds before answering. Because the man found out she had enough evidence to destroy him. My chest tightened. How? Someone inside the company told him. And the trip? A distraction. Rachel explained that my wife had intentionally made it look like she was leaving with friends. She had even asked 2 women she knew to post pictures from an earlier trip so that anyone watching would believe she was somewhere else. The hotel reservation was real, but it had never been used. She had booked it only to create a record that would support her story. I thought about all the details I had dismissed. The quick kiss, the nervous look, the way she had avoided answering simple questions. She had been afraid, but she had also been lying to me deliberately. Rachel said my wife was currently in a safe location, waiting for the right moment to hand over the evidence. I asked where she was. Rachel refused to tell me. Why? I demanded. Because if you know and someone gets to you, they can get to her. I looked at my son. He was listening carefully. I asked Rachel whether the man had been following us. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, "Did you see the SUV?" I nodded. There were 2. Rachel's face became serious. Then we need to leave. We returned to my car, but before we could get inside, my son suddenly stopped. Dad, I turned around. What? He was staring at Rachel. She knows. Rachel looked confused. Knows what? My son reached into his backpack and pulled out the envelope. He opened it and removed the photograph of my wife standing beside the man. Then he flipped it over. There was a handwritten note on the back that I hadn't noticed earlier. My son handed it to Rachel. She read it, and her face changed immediately. Where did you get this? She asked. My son said it had been inside the envelope. Rachel looked at me. This isn't from your wife. I frowned. What? She turned the photograph around and showed me the handwriting. Look at the date. I looked at it, then I looked at the photograph. Rachel pointed to a small mark written beneath the date. This is a code. I asked what it meant. She said it was a reference to a file location, a hidden digital archive where my wife had stored copies of the evidence. I asked why she hadn't told me about it. Rachel said she had been waiting until she knew who she could trust. Then my son spoke. Mom trusted Dad. Rachel looked at him. My son continued. That's why she left the envelope for him. I stared at my son. He looked at me and said, She wanted you to find it. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. For days, I had believed my wife had been trying to hide everything from me. Now I was beginning to understand that she might have been trying to lead me toward the truth without putting me directly in danger. But one question remained. If she trusted me, I said, why didn't she just tell me? Rachel looked away. My son answered, because she was afraid you would choose her. I frowned. What does that mean? He stared at me. Then he said something that made my entire understanding of the situation collapse. Dad, Mom wasn't afraid you would leave her. I waited. She was afraid you would stay. I didn't understand. Rachel looked at my son, and I could see that she knew exactly what he meant. Explain, I said. My son's eyes filled with tears. Mom knew if you found out what she had done, you wouldn't leave her. You'd try to save her, and that's exactly what she didn't want. I stared at him. Why? He looked down. Because she thinks she's the reason they came after you. The words hit me like a punch. I turned toward Rachel. What does he mean? Rachel didn't answer. Rachel. She finally looked at me. And the expression on her face told me there was still one piece of the story that neither my wife nor my son had told me. I stepped closer. What did my wife do that made them come after me? Rachel looked at my son. My son shook his head. Then Rachel said quietly, she used your name. I felt my stomach drop. What? She used your name to open something. I stared at her. What did she open? Rachel hesitated. Then she said, an account. I looked at my son. He suddenly turned away, and that was when I realized he had known this part all along. My wife hadn't simply moved money behind my back. She had used my identity to protect herself. And now, if the documents were real, I was already connected to everything she had been trying to hide. I didn't say anything for several seconds after Rachel told me my wife had used my name to open an account. My mind was racing through everything I had just learned, trying to connect facts that had seemed unrelated only hours earlier. The secret account, the transfers, the man who had answered my wife's phone, the documents in the envelope, the threats, my son being followed, and now my identity being connected to something I had never agreed to. I looked at Rachel and asked, "What kind of account?" She hesitated. "An account used to move money." I shook my head. "That doesn't tell me anything." She explained that my wife had opened the account using information that belonged to me, but she had done it because the man had convinced her that she needed a way to move money without him being able to trace everything directly back to her. I felt anger rise immediately. "So she committed fraud using my name?" Rachel looked at me. "She was trying to protect you. She used my identity." "I know. She put my name on documents I never signed." Rachel didn't argue. "I know." I turned away, furious. Protecting me didn't make what she had done acceptable. She had taken a decision that could have destroyed my life without ever giving me the chance to decide whether I was willing to take that risk. My son was standing beside the car, listening. I looked at him and asked, "Did you know about this?" He immediately shook his head. "Not everything, but you knew she used my name." He hesitated. That hesitation was enough. "How long?" I asked. He looked down. "A few days." I felt betrayed all over again. "You knew and you still didn't tell me?" He started crying. I was scared. So was I. He looked at me. "Mom told me she was going to fix it." I shook my head. "Your mother has been saying she's going to fix things for months." He wiped his face. She really was trying. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. I told Rachel I wanted to speak to my wife. Rachel immediately said no. "Not yet." I stared at her. "You don't get to tell me when I can talk to my own wife. If you call her now, she'll come home." "That's exactly what I want." Rachel looked at me. "And that's exactly what the man wants too." I stopped. She explained that my wife had been staying away because she knew the man was watching her. If she suddenly returned home, he would know that she had told me something. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I asked. Rachel said, "Wait until she contacts you." I laughed bitterly. "I've been waiting all weekend." Rachel looked at my phone. Not anymore. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my wife. I answered immediately. "Where are you?" I asked. She didn't speak at first. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "Are you with our son?" I looked at him. "Yes." "Is anyone else there?" I looked at Rachel. "No." Rachel shook her head, warning me not to mention her. I lied. "No." My wife exhaled. "Good." Her voice was exhausted. "I need you to listen to me before you say anything." I almost lost my temper. "You have been lying to me for months. You used my name. You moved our money. You lied about where you were staying. A man answered your phone, and you involved our son. I think I've listened enough." She started crying. "I know." Those two words stopped me. There was no argument, no denial, no attempt to defend herself. Just, "I know." I asked where she was. She said she was coming home. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's over." I felt my chest tighten. "What is over?" she said. "The part where I keep trying to protect you by lying to you." Then the call ended. My son looked at me. "She's coming home." I nodded. Rachel immediately told us we needed to leave the parking lot. She said we couldn't stay there because the man might know we had met her. We drove home using a different route. I kept checking the mirrors, but there was no sign of the SUV. When we reached the house, Rachel stayed in her car nearby. She told me she would be close if we needed her, but she didn't want my wife to know she had spoken to me. I didn't understand why until Rachel explained that she needed to know whether my wife would finally tell me the truth or continue protecting herself. I didn't like it, but I agreed. My son went upstairs. I stayed downstairs alone. My wife came home just after midnight. I heard the garage door open, then the sound of her car entering. I stood in the living room. The front door opened. She walked inside carrying a small bag. For a second, everything felt normal. Then she looked at me. She froze. I could see the fear in her face. Not fear of me. Fear of what I now knew. She slowly closed the door. "Where's our son?" she asked. "Upstairs." "Is he okay?" "He's fine." She nodded. Then she looked at me again. Did you find the envelope? Yes. Her eyes closed. I watched her take a deep breath. Did you read it? Yes. She sat down on the edge of the couch. I didn't sit beside her. Tell me the truth. She stared at the floor. I was going to. When? Soon. You've been saying that for months. I know. I looked at her. Why did you use my name? She started crying. I expected her to deny it. She didn't. Instead, she whispered, because he told me he would destroy you. Who? She looked up. You know who. The man. She nodded. What does he have against me? Nothing. Then why would he destroy me? Because of what I found. I stepped closer. What did you find? She wiped her tears. Money. I almost laughed. Everyone keeps saying money. What money? She told me that 2 years earlier, she had discovered a series of suspicious transactions through one of the companies her firm worked with. At first, she thought they were legitimate transfers. Then she realized the money was being moved between several companies before disappearing. She started investigating quietly. The deeper she went, the more names she found. People who had trusted the company had lost money. Some of them didn't even know their accounts were being used. My wife found documents showing that the man had been manipulating financial records. She copied the files and planned to report him. That was when he discovered what she had done. He threatened you? I asked. She nodded. What did he say? He said he would make it look like you were involved. I stared at her. How? He had access to your information. I felt cold. What information? Your identification, your financial records, your old signatures, everything. Why? Because I gave it to him. I stared at my wife. She immediately said, I didn't know what he was going to do with it. You gave him my information? I thought I was protecting us. By giving a criminal my identity? She started crying again. I stepped away. You should have told me. I was afraid. You should have trusted me. I did. No, you didn't. She looked at me. I trusted you enough to know you would try to save me. I stared at her. That's not trust. She looked down. I know. I asked her about the money. She told me that the man had forced her to move money through an account she had opened using my identity. She said she believed she could use the account to track where the money was going and gather evidence. But then he discovered what she was doing and began threatening her. She had started transferring money to him because she believed that if she stopped, he would expose the account and make it appear that I had been part of the scheme. I asked how much money had been moved. She told me the amount. I couldn't speak. It was enough to ruin us. I asked her where the money had come from. She looked at me. Some of it was ours. My chest tightened. How much? She gave me another number. I turned away. Years of savings. Money we had planned to use for our son's college. Money we had worked for together. Gone. You took our son's future, I said. She immediately shook her head. I was trying to save it. No, you were trying to save yourself. She started crying. I didn't yell. That somehow made the moment worse. I asked her why she had gone on the trip if she knew the man was watching her. She said she hadn't actually gone on a girls' trip. She had spent the first night in a safe place with Rachel. The next day, she met someone who had access to the financial records she needed. She had been trying to obtain the final evidence that would prove the man had been using our identities and other people's accounts. But she had made one mistake. What mistake? She looked at me. I told him about you. My heart stopped. What did you tell him? That you were starting to ask questions. I stared at her. And then? He said he knew. Knew what? She started shaking. That you would eventually find out. I stepped closer. Find out what? She looked toward the stairs. Then she whispered, the account wasn't the only thing he opened using your name. I felt the room go silent. What else? She didn't answer. Tell me. She looked at me through her tears. There's a second account. My stomach dropped. What second account? She shook her head. I don't know. I stared at her. You don't know? He showed me the documents. What documents? She looked terrified. He opened a company. I frowned. In my name? She nodded. I felt the floor shift beneath me. What kind of company? She whispered the name. I recognized it immediately. It was a company I had never heard of, but I recognized the address. It was connected to the financial firm. My wife looked at me. And Dad? I turned. My son was standing at the top of the stairs. His face was pale. He had heard everything. My wife looked at him and immediately stood up. Go back upstairs. He didn't move. Mom? She stared at him. He slowly walked down the stairs. Why did you use Dad's name? My wife began crying. I was trying to protect him. My son stopped halfway down. No. My wife looked at him. You weren't. She stared at our son. He continued walking toward us. You were protecting yourself. My wife's face collapsed. I looked at my son. Where did you hear that? He didn't answer. He walked past me. Then he stopped beside the front door. My wife called his name. He turned around. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something. Instead, he looked at both of us with tears in his eyes. Then he opened the door. And suddenly, he walked away. I rushed toward him. Son. He didn't stop. I followed him onto the porch. But before I could reach him, a car pulled up at the curb. My son stopped. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out. I recognized him immediately. It was the man from my wife's phone. He looked directly at me. Then he looked at my son. And finally, he smiled. That was when I realized my wife had never been running from him. She had been running from what he knew about me. The man stood beside the car and looked at me as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. My son was frozen on the sidewalk, staring at him with a mixture of fear and anger. Behind me, my wife had come to the doorway, and the moment she saw the man, all the color disappeared from her face. I turned toward her. You knew he was coming. She shook her head immediately. No. The man smiled slightly. She didn't. His voice was calm, almost polite, which somehow made the situation feel even more dangerous. I stepped between him and my son. Stay away from my family. He looked at me and said, Your family is exactly why I'm here. My wife rushed outside. Don't talk to him. I turned toward her. You've been telling me not to talk to him for months. I think I'm done listening. The man looked at my wife and then back at me. She told you everything, didn't she? I said nothing. He smiled again. Not everything, my wife whispered. Please, just leave. He ignored her. You think she was protecting you? She wasn't. She was protecting herself. I felt my anger rising, but I refused to give him the reaction he clearly wanted. Then tell me what I don't know. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. My wife immediately stepped forward. No. He looked at her. You should have told him yourself. I asked what was inside. He held the folder toward me. Proof. I took it. My wife grabbed my arm. Don't. I looked at her. Why? She shook her head. Because you don't understand what you're looking at. I opened the folder anyway. Inside were copies of financial documents, contracts, bank records, and several pages containing my personal information. At first, it looked exactly like the evidence my wife had described. Then I saw something that made me stop. My signature appeared at the bottom of one of the documents. I stared at it. I never signed this. The man nodded. I know. I looked at him. Then why is my signature here? He said, because your wife gave us permission to use it. My wife immediately shouted, That's not true. He looked at her calmly. You gave us everything we needed. I turned toward my wife. What does he mean? She looked devastated. I didn't know they would use it like that. The man laughed quietly. You never know anything until it's too late. I stepped toward him. Who is we? He didn't answer. I asked again. Who else is involved? He looked at my wife. She knows. My wife shook her head. No, I don't. The man smiled. Then maybe you should ask your husband about his old business partner. The words hit me harder than anything else he had said. My old business partner. A man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years. Someone I had trusted once, before we had a disagreement that ended our partnership. I stared at the man. What does he have to do with this? The man said. Everything. My wife looked at me. I didn't know. I turned toward her. You knew his name? She shook her head. No, the man interrupted. She knew enough. I demanded an explanation. He told me the company opened in my name wasn't actually designed to steal money from me. It had been created as a vehicle to move money from several businesses without attracting attention. My identity was used because I had a clean financial history and no connection to the people involved. But there was one thing they hadn't expected. Someone inside the operation had started stealing from them. The man said my wife discovered the missing money and believed he was responsible. She had been wrong. The money wasn't being stolen by him. It was being redirected by someone much closer to me. I looked at my wife. Who? She shook her head. I don't know. The man said. You do. I turned toward him. Stop playing games. He reached into the folder and pulled out another photograph. He handed it to me. I looked down and felt my entire body go cold. It showed my old business partner standing beside my wife. Not recently. The photograph was dated almost 2 years earlier, around the same time the financial transfers had started. I looked at my wife. She was crying. Why were you with him? I asked. I wasn't working with him. Then why are you in a photograph with him? She said. Because he contacted me. Why? He told me you were in danger. I stared at her. He told you I was in danger? She nodded. He said the man you're talking to was planning to use your identity. I looked at the man. He didn't react. So you believed him? I asked my wife. Yes. And that's when you started moving money? She nodded. He told me it was the only way to protect you. I closed my eyes for a second. Everything was beginning to connect. My wife hadn't started the scheme because she wanted money. She had been manipulated by 2 men who were using her fear of losing me to make her do exactly what they needed. Then my son spoke. Dad. I turned around. He was standing beside the car. He was holding something, an old phone. I asked where he got it. He said, Mom gave it to me. My wife's eyes widened. Why would you have that? I asked. My son looked at his mother. She told me to keep it hidden. I walked toward him. What's on it? I don't know. I took the phone. It was locked. I asked my wife for the password. She shook her head. I don't know. I stared at her. You gave our son a locked phone, and you don't know the password? She looked terrified. I wasn't supposed to have it. The man suddenly stepped forward. Give me the phone. I turned toward him. No. His expression changed. For the first time, the calmness disappeared from his face. Give it to me. I held it tighter. My son moved behind me. My wife stepped forward. Don't. The man looked at her. You have no idea what you're doing. My wife shook her head. No, you don't. He stared at her. She looked at me. Then she said, open it. I looked at her. You know the password? She nodded. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to know if he would come for it. I looked at the man. He had stopped smiling. My wife whispered the password. I entered it. The phone opened. There were dozens of recordings, messages, photographs, documents. I opened the first recording. A familiar voice filled the screen. My old business partner. He was speaking to someone. I listened. Then another voice answered. The man standing in front of me. They were discussing the company. They were discussing my identity. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. They were discussing my wife. The recording continued. My old partner said, she'll do anything if she thinks her husband is in danger. The man laughed. Then he said, and the boy? My old partner replied, the boy is easy. He trusts his mother. I looked at my son. His face had gone white. My wife covered her mouth. The recording continued. The man asked what would happen if I discovered the account. My old partner answered, he'll blame her. Then he said something that changed everything. He always protects his family. That's why she's the perfect weapon. I stopped the recording. Nobody spoke. I looked at my wife. She was crying. You heard this? I asked. She nodded. When? Yesterday. And you still came home? She nodded. Why? She looked at our son. Because I realized I'd been doing exactly what they wanted. I looked at her. She continued. They wanted me to move the money. They wanted me to use your identity. They wanted me to lie to you. They wanted me to make you believe I betrayed you. They wanted you angry enough to confront the wrong person. I looked at the man. He was silent. I asked my wife, what was their real goal? She shook her head. I didn't know until yesterday. Tell me. She looked at the phone. They wanted you to disappear. My son gasped. I felt the entire world become still. What? My wife stepped closer. They didn't just want your money. They wanted your name removed from everything. I stared at her. She explained that the company created in my name was only one part of the plan. If the financial scheme collapsed, they needed someone to take the blame. They had been building a trail of documents that would make it appear as though I had authorized the transactions. My wife was supposed to provide the final piece by signing one last document. She refused. That was when the threats began. The man suddenly stepped backward. I looked at him. Where are you going? He didn't answer. My wife whispered, call the police. I took out my phone. The man immediately turned and ran toward the car. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. The evidence was already on the phone. The recordings, the documents, the names, the transactions, everything. My son stood beside me. He looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You have nothing to apologize for." "But I lied to you. You were scared." "I should have told you." "Yes." He looked down. I pulled him toward me. "But you did eventually." My wife stood several feet away. She was crying. I looked at her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I'm sorry." I believe she meant it. But forgiveness wasn't something I could give her that night. Not after the lies. Not after the money. Not after using my name. Not after putting our son in the middle of a danger he never should have known existed. I told her the truth. "I love you." She looked at me. "But I don't know if I can trust you again." She nodded through her tears. "I understand." The police arrived later that night after Rachel contacted them. The investigation that followed lasted months. The man was arrested along with several others connected to the scheme. My old business partner was eventually exposed as one of the people behind it. The company created in my name was shut down, and the evidence from the phone proved that I had never knowingly participated in the operation. Most of the money was recovered, although not all of it. My wife cooperated with the investigation and admitted everything she had done. She was not innocent. She had made terrible decisions. She had lied to me, moved our money, used my identity, and allowed our son to carry a burden no child should ever have carried. But she had also been manipulated and threatened for a long time. Understanding why she did it didn't erase what she had done. Months later, our family looked completely different. My son started seeing a counselor, not because there was something wrong with him, but because he needed somewhere safe to put everything he had been carrying. He slowly became himself again. He started laughing more. He stopped checking the windows every time a car passed our house. He stopped asking whether someone was following us. And one evening, while we were sitting at the dinner table, he looked at me and said, "Dad, remember when I walked away from you?" I smiled. "How could I forget?" He laughed. Then he said, "I thought you were going to hate me." I shook my head. "Never." He looked at me. "Even after everything?" I answered honestly. "Especially after everything." My wife was sitting across from us. She looked down. I knew things between us would never return to exactly what they had been before that weekend. Some trust can be repaired, but it cannot be restored by pretending nothing happened. We had to rebuild it slowly, one truth at a time. And that was the biggest lesson I took from everything. My wife didn't leave for a girls' trip. She left because she believed she was protecting us. My son didn't walk away because he hated me. He walked away because he was trying to protect me too. And the man who had spent months trying to destroy my family believed that fear would keep us divided. He was wrong. Because the moment my son finally stopped protecting everyone else's secrets and told me the truth, everything changed. I lost money. I lost trust. I lost the version of my marriage I thought I would have forever. But I didn't lose my son. And when I think back to that night, I don't remember the man standing beside the car. I don't remember the bank accounts. I don't remember the threats. I remember my son walking away from me in that parking lot. For a few terrifying seconds, I thought he was leaving me. But he wasn't. He was walking toward the truth. And that truth was the one thing my family needed most.